a little sort of garden flavor on this warm evening here in Philadelphia. Tonight's talk is boxed in, and as you'll see, this is maybe a little bit of a pun because I'm going to focus on the Stenton boxwood plantings, the Buxus sempervirens that have been growing at Stenton since 1912, which were intended to be sort of a small, low edging, as you see in some of the period photographs I'll be sharing. But that was allowed to grow to its full size in the 20th century. It follows its natural habit and has created a large billowing hedge against which our colorful perennials bloom each year. And so it's a very different effect than originally intended, and yet a lovely one with these large relic plants that I think give the garden its sense of age. And because boxwood are so susceptible to multiple diseases these days, our Colonial Revival Garden has become a rare survival and may in part have something to do with its kind of sort of isolation within Stenton Park in an area where there are not a lot of other boxwood growing. But to orient you to Stenton, just in case you haven't been there or thought about the site as a whole for a while, this area where the star is here is where the Colonial Revival Garden is. This is a sort of circa 1970s aerial view, and this factory building is not here anymore. This is an open kind of free growing meadow, free range meadow at the moment. But you can see the house and the wing. The area essentially maintained by the Colonial Dames is this kind of pie shape here, and this is the barn right at the corner of Wyndham and 18th Street. And our little pie shape, just to orient you again in plan, the house, the wing, the barn, and here's the Colonial Revival right up against Revival Garden, right up against this corner. And I just thought I'd also take a moment to point out, for those of you who may have not had a chance to visit us yet this year, we have a new visitor orientation route. In fact, we're opening an older gate. There are brick piers at both of these openings that are from the 1960s, and we now have this entrance working as our main visitor arrival. And so you would walk or drive in here. The new Dinah Memorial, which we have full approval to build and are still fundraising to build, will appear on the left. The 1939 Logan Memorial that was brought to Stenton in 2018 is on the right. And a car can continue around, picking up what was a historic axial drive here. And there'll be new parking eventually leading up to a kind of visitor arrival in the service wing. And then what we've been using as an entrance for many years is really just a service entrance and an exit. We also have a new pedestrian gate that directly connects to the park and brings people right into the heart of the garden part of the landscape, and is a really lovely connection to the neighborhood, and is working well for giving us new invitations to our neighbors. And here's a view just looking from the garden toward the house to kind of orient you to that billowing hedge as it's become today. And so you can sort of see the juxtaposition of house and garden. As many of you know, Stenton was a multi-100-acre plantation, over 500 acres, and it's at its largest. And so it was a farmed landscape, and you're seeing some late 19th century views of that, including an alley of hemlocks that went out to the Logan Cemetery that's out in the park, and that we've talked about trying to restore in one way or another, again, adding that connection of landscape connection of the historic site inside to the fence to the park outside the fence. So as the Colonial Dames thought about themselves and their place at Stenton as stewards and how they wanted to present it to the public, they looked to Logan descendants for guidance, and some Logan descendants were also Colonial Dames as well. But I'm showing you an image inside the house of the room we now call the office, with after 1915, because it has objects from descendant Samuel Betton's bequest in place here. And I'm about to tell you about Letitia Wright's scrapbook, and in one of the things she tells us there is that Betton and cousin Albanus Logan were consulted about the location of the garden, and she recorded that they agree that the old garden, originally comprising 2 acres, which is almost as big as the pie that the colonial dames administer, was placed exactly where we are now laying it out. The foundation of the old terrace wall was found and rebuilt upon. So that seemed to be good enough for Letitia and the dames, that they were going to be putting an old style garden in a place where an old garden was, which may be partly true as well. But Stenton was, by the city ordinance under which the dames took stewardship, it was called an historic object lesson for the public. And so again, thinking about themselves and their place and how they want the garden to project, if Stenton is to be an object lesson to the public, as the ordinance reads, should we not try to restore the garden as nearly as possible to the old original, and in any event, make it a typically colonial garden? Should we not try to have it, oops, didn't mean to turn it just yet, sorry. And I'm not able to see because my picture is above that. Should we not try to have it in its most historically correct form? She goes on to say, in time, as representative, a garden within our hedges, as the New York Society has in the Van Cortlandt House. And I'm not even sure exactly what she means by within our hedges, but I thought that was just so ironic, in that now the garden sits within the dames' hedges. So like all projects at Stenton, this garden involved many collaborations, one between the city of Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania Dames, because the city owns the land and the buildings, and of course the Dames, the collections, and do all the fundraising and administering of projects. This one also involved personal and familial collaboration, kind of like the collecting did itself, but in particular, 2 second cousins who were Logan descendants and both Germantown natives. The scrapbook that I will share with you was put together in great detail by Letitia Ellicott Carpenter Wright. And I've been careful to use her full name because her daughter's name is also Letitia Ellicott Wright, and died only shortly after her mother, and they're both colonial dames and easily confused. But Letty, as she was known, was turning 50 when she became the garden chair in 1911. She, just to give you a little bit of a sense of her Germantown background, they're not her Logan ancestors, but she spent time as a child running around her grandparents' estate, Philolina, which was demolished in the late 19th century. But her grandfather, George Washington Carpenter, was a natural history collector whose some of his collections are at the Academy of Natural Sciences. And this had a just tremendous landscape, including a clock tower and a summer house. And I wish I had photos to share with you, but just to conjure up the kinds of places that she knew in her mind and that were just not very far from Stenton, that are part of what goes into the making of this new 20th century garden. And her cousin, John Casper Wister, who's the same generation as she, but he's actually about almost 20, he's just over 25 years younger than she, 26 years younger, served as landscape architect. And she did hire him. There's clear records that she paid him. So he was only in his mid-20s when they were collaborating on this project. And really, it may have even been one of his first after his graduation from Harvard with the landscape architecture degree in 1909. He would go on to have a remarkable career in horticulture that included the Scott Arboretum and being director of the Tyler Arboretum. And some things written about him late in his career call him the Dean of American Horticulture, and he received many accolades for that work. But his grandparents, William Wister and Sarah Logan Fisher, lived at Belfield Farm, which had previously been lived in for just over a decade by Charles Wilson Peel. And you're seeing it depicted by Peel here in his 1816 painting of the grounds. And so it may have been somewhat going into a kind of ruinous garden already by the time that Worcester was growing up, but he would have known this particular special garden landscape in Germantown. And this is all part of LaSalle University today. I should also mention his family did build later houses on the same estate. So he actually grew up in a house called Worcester that his family left to the city of Philadelphia, which was demolished in the 1950s. And he and Letitia would have both known a sense of the Wingohocking Creek, which is now a sewer under Belfield Avenue, but in this area, and would have known a very different natural landscape just to the north and west of Stenton than we do today. So Letitia got her plan, and Worcester, you can see that characteristic pie shape again, and he situated the Colonial Revival Garden, these rectangular beds with paths around and in between out to a distant edge. This is where the boxwood would eventually kind of go along the edge here. So all he did was really specify the shape for the garden. His plant knowledge went more specifically into this screen of native plants that kind of captures the formal arrival along 18th Street and up along the park, and then kind of really enclosing the sort of core area of the historic site with the house against the park. And this really was meant to be a screen, and has grown into, and we've continued to maintain it as a kind of screen that we add to, and offers a sort of oasis for the Stenton landscape. But you can also see that he's included beds here, which he may still be just drawing existing beds, or at least shadows of beds that relate to a garden here that axially connects to a side door on the house. And we tend to call this Deborah Logan's garden. We don't really know exactly how far back it goes, but his car plan also, his arrival plan connects up to this sort of historic drive through the landscape here. I should also just point out, and maybe this is partly some of his lack of experience at the time, the way he draws in and the numbers of plants, and this is very hard to read through this blueprint version, but he's overplanted the landscape. If they actually had the money to plant as many plants as he specified, they would have kind of, some certainly would have died just from growing into each other and overcrowding. So what we know about the creation of the garden is Letitia's really just careful, detailed record keeping in this book format. So we have it in our archives, and it's as if she has it's kind of like published by the Stenton Garden Committee, and then it has a title page that she's carefully delineated. The first opening tells you who all the members of the garden committee are, herself. I'm not sure who everybody is in full, but Sarah Logan Worcester is also a cousin to her and to John Casper Worcester. That's Mrs. James Starr Jr. And I wondered if Miss Mary Howe and Mrs. Arthur Meggs are related to George Howe and the architect Meggs, that they have this architectural expertise and connection they're also bringing to the committee. Miss Emily Reed Fox is also a Logan descendant. And Mrs. J. Willis Martin, a couple of years later, would be one of the founders of the Garden Club of America that would be founded at Stenton. So this whole idea that this was just very much kind of a family affair as much as a dame's project is suggested by who joined and was invited to be on this committee. So to give you a sense of some of these pages, it's a combination of kind of typed records and reports and her handwritten notes. The dates are all written in red, so you can easily follow along. There are numerous pages that have these series of small photographic prints recording work being done or progress that's been made. I made a note here because on our garden committee lately, we've been talking a lot about mowing our meadow and what kind of mowers we need or what mowing service we might use. And here was some sort of debate about whether they needed a Philadelphia instead of a Pennsylvania lawnmower. And I have no idea exactly what they mean by that, but I thought that was a lot of fun. Here's some details of some of this putting in and laying out for the axial plans for the beds. And some of the grading was done by the city of Philadelphia. And this is looking toward the house, as you can see. And then this one looking in the opposite direction when there was sort of like a little park ranger, just kind of very small park building out in Stenton Park, and the new housing that had gone up just across the way. So Letitia did a lot of research in Logan family papers. She doesn't make it clear necessarily which papers she specifically looked at. She's not naming collections at the Historical Society. It sounds like a lot of these papers may have also still been in family hands, maybe in the Wisters and so forth. But she notes that these are William Logan's plants rather, information that he ordered in the second month of 1753. And I'm just focusing in a little bit on the laurel, rhododendron, and azaleas, because that seemed to be one of the things both that John Caspar Wister loved and worked with a lot later in his life, but that he zeroed in on. And there are a lot of these in the native plant screen. But you're seeing plants that we continue to keep. We have this list that we work from that was Letitia's list that she took from the Logan family papers. And so that is our guide for the plants that we place in the garden. And we definitely don't have everything perfectly. We still have some knockout roses that pre-existed our kind of focused effort to really stick to the list. But we really do try to keep it to things that could have been in the garden in 1911 with a focus on more historic varieties. But Letitia also notes, here's a kind of a fun quote from Deborah Norris Logan in 1827. She's enjoying the full glory of the vegetation and the superb appearance of her glycine, which I think she's referring to wisteria, that's a period name often used for that. We have yucca in the garden now, and we were inspired by Deborah's use to include that. And also early in the book, Letitia's taken clearly her own tracing off of Wister's plan, because it's on a tracing paper, and she's turned it so that it sort of feels upside down to us, I think, because this is the house up here, the way you would walk in. But she's just drawing in or writing in colors. So she may have been inspired by the English garden designer Gertrude Jekyll. She doesn't specifically say that, but she may have been looking at other garden magazines that were showing designs that were inspired by her. So it may not even be a direct connection, but she's doing a color-driven kind of a rainbow scheme where she moves from kind of reds to oranges to yellows to these whites and yellows up to blues and purples, and has her scheme going. Interestingly, in this one instance, she includes the name of a plant as if it's a color, but sometimes pink is a plant and a color. And this is a rendition that our landscape architect, Claudia Levy, has created for us to make that scheme come to life. So just throughout the book, there are these wonderful orders for the nurseries, Andorra, Meehan's, all the nearby nurseries were supplying plants, or Letty was in correspondence with them. Here's her invoice for paying John Caspar Wister for his work. just some more of her plant notes from the papers in various, this is someone else's handwriting. The handwriting on the right is hers, but this is seeds ordered um, from Dreer's, April 1st. List of trees and shrubs at Stenton, planted before 1911, planted since 1911. So she's just keeping careful records. And this is in the garden's second year. The Dames were a bit disappointed that the boxwood didn't arrive from Mount Vernon until the second year in June. So the 27th of June was great celebration when these boxwood arrived from Mount Vernon. And so there's this sense among the Dames that they also want to have historic plants and talk about getting certain flowers that someone could get seeds from Shirley Plantation or thing. So they're literally trying to have these historical connections by location. I'm not sure whether they're always historic, truly what we think of as 18th century plants, but they're interested in a kind of antiquarian association of site and where a plant came from. The book also has fundraising in it. So we have a record of many of the little notes back and forth, people offering donations. This is actually here one that came in from a Miss Morton for $5, and it's kind of fun. It's like as if this book is a little interactive flap book where you can unfold all the little notes that are pasted in. This one from Cheltenham is actually from, I'm pretty sure, I should have included, but I'm pretty sure it's from Mary Haynes, and this would have been the Haynes family property that was not too long ago demolished. That was in Cheltenham Township. And I thought this was a good one for our garden committee too. I know our garden chair, Carol Rush, is on the call, and we're always talking about tools. And tools are really important for us at Stenton because of the way, as I mentioned, some of the boxwood diseases can spread through tools. So, and we work with garden volunteers, so no one can bring their own tools. And in fact, if you've been in a garden a lot, we ask people to disinfect their shoe soles before working in the garden. And everything that comes into contact with the Colonial Revival Garden is kept at Stenton and is sterilized as well. But this little memo is just kind of fun because you notice through this inventory of tools, things are no good, needs bolts, repaired, no good, there's only one. Some things are new. So we have similar kinds of ongoing issues with tools. And this is looking in two different directions. One of the 1913 views by Pancoast, looking toward the house, and you can see that they used tan bark as which is, I wouldn't have known that had it not been delineated or explained in the book. But that was what they used for the paths. And it's a very different color scheme, in effect, from the 3/8 crushed limestone that we've used in our garden restoration. We speculate, we don't really know whether for sure, but whether part of what's helping the box and has helped the boxwood in recent decades is to have limestone because of the pH of the soil, having their roots in immediate proximity to these paths. This catawba that you can see kind of on the park side, and I don't know whether you can quite make it out, but it's so open at this time that this is part of the train embankment that runs along Stenton. But this catawba is still here. It still leaves out, and it has masonry inside it. There was a period where I think to prop up rotting trees, they either poured cement or put brickwork inside. This one has brickwork. But we love its kind of craggy relic, sort of gnarly quality, and it kind of amazes me. It's one of the few trees we still have from that time period. And we also still have this Kentucky coffee tree that's growing here. You can come and see. And this is a lantern slide in the Smithsonian in the Garden Club of America collection. I'm not quite sure when this sundial base, and presumably I can't quite tell, but presumably there is a sundial on top, may have been placed here. It's a deceptive photo because it almost makes it look like a garden table, which it is not, but it is a colored lantern slide. And then looking the opposite direction out toward the park today. And this is the garden that Susan Yeager will be showing you shortly. So Letitia was admittedly very proud of the work that she and the Dames had done, and she published this little booklet, The Colonial Garden at Stenton, described in old letters, so using her research in the Logan papers. And she gave it as talks to quite a number of organizations, so she was very much in demand, clearly, as a speaker, and going around and sharing all this work. But she says here in this booklet, the letters from which these extracts have been taken were written in colonial days, and they have been in the possession of the family ever since. They were brought to light in 1911 when every effort was being made to obtain data for the restoration of the Stenton Garden. No exertion has been spared to make its planting historically correct, for nothing has been put into the garden unless there was a record of its having been there in colonial times. And she goes on, but she's very clear about wanting this to be what she thinks of as a true colonial garden. And we of course now call it the Colonial Revival Garden. And here it is. I think this is also one of the 1913 Pancoast views, although it could be by him and a little bit later because of these plantings in the corners. There's some notation of someone saying they think it would look really good a few years later with these trees in the corner. That doesn't stay because Frederick Law Olmsted visited the property and thought everything looked really good except for these trees. And there's another view looking back across the planted beds at the house. And just to bring you into the present, this is our garden chair, Carol Rush, and what we've been fondly referring to as our baby box. So we had made it a priority to want to grow some more Stenton box, so we would have them on site. As I mentioned, we don't bring other plants in because of fear of disease. And so we worked with Morris Arboretum, who helped us to take cuttings of several different plants. You see the different colors are different original stock in the garden. And where we will be placing, before you enter the kind of main bed, we'll be placing a small hedge here outside. And again, the intent is to keep these pruned and low. And it's up to us and later generations to see if that can happen. And I wanted to just kind of make a special sort of memoriam here and in honor of Dr. Jim Butler, who died this fall. He was a professor of English at LaSalle and gave Stenton the original Worcester drawing for the landscape. He rescued it along with other Worcester drawings from Worcester's house in the 1990s after Worcester's wife Gertrude died, and she was considerably younger than Worcester, who died in 82. But he started a collection of Worcester family papers at LaSalle in the library, and I believe a lot of the other drawings are there as part of that collection. But we will always be grateful for his bringing it to our attention and then giving us the plan that's kind of the key to the landscape. And for those of you who might be particularly interested in gardens of this time period, I can send this out or we can send it out to you all as an email, but I did put together just sort of a little short bibliography of this style of gardening.